The NDP squelched democracy with fake allegations of threats. Who could have seen this coming? Except literally everybody? The NDP planned to create something called Bighorn Wildland Provincial Park. It's basically a $40 million plan to turn much of the land from north of Drayton Valley, south to Sundre, and then west to Banff and Jasper into a park off limits for those who have traditionally used it for quadding, random camping, and hunting and fishing. The problem is, a lot of people live in small towns throughout that area, and many of them moved there specifically for the ability to use the public lands in that area for those activities. And other people have lived in these towns for generations, doing all those things without a problem. But now the NDP, who are on their way out the door, are suddenly changing everything against the will of the people who actually live there. So unsurprisingly, the consultations on these land use changes, they're not going very well. People are angry, and they're saying so. And just this week, the NDP have shut down the consultation process. In the press release issued by Environment Minister Shannon Phillips, she said, "However, in recent weeks I have become increasingly concerned about the inflamed rhetoric and inaccurate statements made by some organizations and individuals on social media. This has led to significant misinformation on the status and substance of the proposal for Bighorn country and, more recently, allegations of bullying, abuse, and concerns over personal safety. I have heard stories of Albertans afraid to attend community events, Albertans berated in public, Albertans followed home, and Albertans feeling intimidated to not speak their mind or participate in this important discussion. These reports are not only deeply concerning, this behavior is not reflective of the values we all share. I call on all of my elected colleagues to denounce the bullying and harassment being faced by Bighorn supporters. As we do not feel we can guarantee the public's safety or freedom from intimidation at this time, I am very disappointed to announce that the upcoming sessions for Drayton Valley, Red Deer, Sundre, and Edmonton will be cancelled. The government of Alberta will immediately reevaluate our engagement plans in order to ensure Albertans in the communities of Drayton Valley, Red Deer, Sundre, and Edmonton can participate safely." But here's the thing, folks. Those threats that caused the cancellation of the consultations, they didn't happen, at least according to the local police in those communities. One person in the mainstream media, Alicia Corbella of the Calgary Herald, and of whom I'm a big fan, actually asked the RCMP about these so-called threats. Look at this from Corbella's article. It's odd, though. Constable Mike Hibbs, the media relations officer for Alberta's RCMP K Division's Southern District, said Monday that he hadn't heard of any threats. "I'm not aware of any threats at all," said Hibbs. Jason Nixon, MLA for Rimbey, Rocky Mountain House, Sundre, says he spoke with many RCMP contacts over the weekend and again on Monday, and none of them were aware of any threats of any kind. "The RCMP in my communities didn't know what I was asking about. They never heard about any threats, and they certainly didn't ask for meetings to be shut down," explained Nixon, who attended a rally in Drayton Valley Monday night that was hastily organized by community representatives to replace the canceled information session scheduled for the conference center there. Phillips also told news reporters that she had been advised by senior RCMP officials to cancel the consultations. But what officials? Nixon doesn't want to call Phillips a liar, but who are you more inclined to believe, the local RCMP or Shannon Phillips? You see, the peasants in these rural towns are not receptive enough to the urbanite, do-gooder NDP cubicle dwellers kicking them out of the backyard playground that the peasants have been using and stewarding and caring for forever. And it's becoming embarrassing for the NDP. And why are the peasants so darn unreceptive? Well, it is not the residents here calling for the changes to the land they use. It's anti-development environmentalist groups like CPAWS, one who receives funding from the pipeline blocking Tides Canada, advising the government to kick the traditional users of these public lands right off them. And to be clear, this is absolutely not the first time the NDP have listened to environmentalist groups to make massive land use changes against the will of the very people who actually use them. The first time was in the Castle region in southern Alberta. That's now a massive park, and many of the people who quadded and hunted and fished and camped there are being phased out of the region. But going back to those fake threats, I called it the second the NDP canceled the consultations. I said that if they're going to deny residents of these rural Alberta towns their ability to be heard by the government before the government changes how they use the land they take care of and they use every day on the basis of threats and intimidation, then the NDP need to produce police reports to prove that something so egregious was happening and that it was actually being taken seriously by both the police and the NDP. Because if there were truly threats, I want to see people who use intimidation and violence to impose their political will on other people stopped in their tracks. That's not how we do political discourse in a civilized first world country. But of course, the NDP couldn't produce those things because there aren't those things. And even if there were instances of uncivil language being used, the ease with which the NDP used that to taint the whole, it's truly despicable. But let me be clear, I'm not a psychic predicting these things. I pay close attention to the NDP when they are met with overwhelming political opposition from rural Alberta. And the NDP has tried this game plan before to some moderate success. Let's look back at the Bill 6 uprising. Bill 6 was rammed through with very little real consultation from the people it would affect the most. The farmers who completely rejected the NDP's union-style rules and regulations that Bill 6 now puts on their family farms. There were a series of wintertime rallies and ongoing protests at the legislature and all across the province as Bill 6 was being pushed through the legislature at breakneck speed. Back then, an NDP MLA who wasn't even at the legislature at the time, Shay Anderson, called a peaceful family rally against Bill 6 at the legislature extremely violent and brutal because someone was verbally critical of his colleague, Labour Minister Laurie Sigurdsson. Another NDP MLA, this time a unknown backbencher named Cam Westhead, claimed Wildrose MLA Rick Strankman was threatening gun violence against government officials when Strankman simply brought up farmers' concerns over how occupational health and safety legislation would affect farmers' abilities to carry guns on their own property for predator control. I would just love to stop and point out here for a second that the NDP think unfriendly words and language expressed to them on the steps of the legislature somehow equates to real-world violence. But for them, when I experienced actual violence at the hands of a left-wing male feminist at the Women's March at the very same steps of the legislature, it was something for the NDP to completely ignore because I was not their ideal victim. Funny that. Oh, and to add to my list, NDP Infrastructure Minister Brian Mason also called those who opposed Bill 6 goons and gangsters. So did we really think the NDP would do anything differently when their next attack on rural Albertans didn't go the way they expected it to? The NDP have a long and storied history of making things up to call off a process that allows residents of small towns to be heard. They have a history of smearing good people as violent thugs in the media to impugn their reputations and deny them their right to participate in the democratic process. The NDP, though, they'll never change. They like to tell stories about normal people to get their way, and the media, for the most part, is more than happy to cooperate. I suppose it's easier than listening to normal people and heeding their concerns. Thankfully, these smear merchants and BS artists will be gone very, very soon. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. What you just saw there is the daily video that I do here at The Rebel, but did you know that I have my own weekly full-length show? It's aptly called The Gun Show, and we talk about issues facing Canadian families in a way that you would never see done in the mainstream media. But to get access to my show and the rest of our incredible premium content, including Ezra Levant's daily Ezra Levant Show, treat yourself to a Rebel subscription today.